to know. That's, you know what I mean? It's useless information in a sense. That, though, conversation is what's going on and what we need to be engaged in.
Okay.
And that's where we really need to sit down and be serious about this. You know, what is it, you know, we're looking at? Because the cost of cleanup is a very real, you know, it's not just una palabra, you know, un saying. You know, how much is, you know.
Te iba a preguntar de nuevo la cuestión que me comentaba sobre el Puerto Rican Trench, toda la cuestión de los desperdicios tóxicos, cómo se ha utilizado a Vieques para como
sí, como la historia. I mean, that is, you have to look, you know, I think, just to put it in very simple terms, how has the federal government used Puerto Rico? The federal used Vieques, specifically the east side. They've used it as a hazardous waste dump. And to this day, and that use went on for decades, many decades, where they were even importing waste. And they were training people how to, you know, explode, you know, bombs, EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. There was, you know, this was going on for many, many decades. There was no inventory, we are told, of this. EPA certainly doesn't have an inventory of all that was done. But the point being that Puerto Rico is going to inherit that. Puerto Rico has inherited that in terms of the health cost.
The environmental cost.
And the environmental cost, in as much as we know under RECA and CERCLA, we still, after all these years and all this $20-some-odd thousand of investigations, they're denying, essentially, that anything of the heavy metals, they're saying it's natural background, and of explosives, we haven't even gotten to the beginning. I mean, EPA is fighting tooth and nail, and they're being ignored totally to get explosives. And in the end, what is EPA saying? EPA is saying the technology doesn't exist to identify the explosives. Well, if the technology doesn't exist to identify the explosives in terms of the study, investigation of the level of contamination, how are you going to clean it up if you don't have the lab technology, you know, to identify it as a contaminant? How are you going to not identify it as being sufficiently clean, you know, which are very real. All of this are the arguments that we should be there talking about. And
that conversation is not taking place.
No. I mean, I'll say it, but that's not a conversation. That is what, you know, is this community interested in this? I think they are. But how do you get them engaged in asking that question?
And that's something that hasn't happened yet in the community.
Right.
Or in the urban.
Well, now you're saying, you know, you were bringing up your conversation about Reyes, about Ruben. You know, those are very valid questions. How contaminated is this place? That's what we need to know. You know, those are the questions we need to be asking. Those are the actions we need to be taking.
And do you think that sometimes, because sometimes there is a lot of public relations coming out of different organizations saying like, we have to clean up, we have to clean up, we have to clean up, but it's a very abstract kind of idealistic call. But in terms of the measures to pursue that, sometimes you think, no te preocupes. Sometimes from the ideal of cleaning up to the more of to pursuing some of the questions, some of the starting points. How do you see that balance?
Well, so far, you know, again, I've been in dialogue with the military, with EPA y la Junta on this since before, you know, the TRC was formed. You know, this is not happening with these groups, though. The Junta has come so many times to talk to people, and
Junta de Calidad Ambiental.
Yeah. Chemists from the Junta came saying, you know, how under the Rosselló administration they were told, you know, to do this sampling, to do this this analysis using a method they refused to use. All of these are, and that it was the wrong method and they didn't want to use it. And saying, offering their assistance. Did anybody pursue that?
Who didn't accept
Nobody wanted to. It was a fabulous presentation to an auditorium of people. Did anybody follow up on that? Those are tools, that you use. Do you understand? Like Pilar should use these, this is exactly, the kind of thing that you use as a tool, in my perception. What I see is that people want to be in charge. I don't understand what that means. Everybody keeps saying, I've got to get control of this thing, or I want to be in charge. And, the comité wants to be in charge, the Alianza wants to be in charge of what? What is it you want to be in charge of? That's, what I don't do you know what I mean? I don't understand. Because meanwhile, while they're doing all this, again, as you see, all of this is going on. All of this, the no further action, all these decrees, all these millions are being spent, which is absurd.
All these millions that, in a way,
are useless information in a way. Totally useless, but...
Useless because there's not going to be a measure like this information won't lead into the process of cleaning up or even
in as much
start to
under RECRA, under CERCLA, under any of it, yes. Yes. Certain areas have been analyzed. To what degree that analyzed has been so manipulated by the nuances of the military looking at this aside, they have identified. We don't need to, we say, well, this is what we're looking at. We know this is there. What specifically, what health ailments does this cause? How pervasive is this? What are the methods that are available? For the most part, this is one of the problems throughout the United States that, again, should be part of our lucha. La lucha, igual que, all of these communities everywhere, people have to start becoming aware of this throughout the United States. People don't wake up in the morning brushing their teeth saying, oh, I wonder how the military toxics problem in my neighborhood is, being resolved. And that's what you need to do. And that's a tremendous, fight. But, if ignoring it it's not going to go away. Achievements have been made. Again, Massachusetts and Safe Drinking Water Act. You learn from this. Why do I see that as a source of education, a source of inspiration? Why do I see EQB's commentaries on these investigations a source of inspiration and dialogue, and another person doesn't? Mainly, I think, because they're not even reading them. I think they're lying and saying they're reading them. Because I just can't. I've never been engaged in any of these members with the TRC about this. And there you go, oh, Stacey, you and your documents are, this kind of. And what's different, but again, this goes back, what's the difference between me and them? Say, well, it must be, it's, you say, oh, it's overwhelming. It's, what, you got to start somewhere. Life's overwhelmed. I don't know how to answer that,
And could you explain a little bit, going back to the question of there was a lot of some scientists that were involved in commenting the study of the killing. They even mentioned, oh, we should be part of the investigation, or we should be taken into account for further investigation, meaning that they should, some of the Puerto Rican scientists should be contracted and try and get involved and get a.
Well, personally, I think this would be a good idea. This was something, actually, for Edwin Hernandez, quite a while back. I gave information that I had received about the killing, and the report the Navy had done in the hope of his becoming involved. But of course, what he wants is the community. It can't be just Stacey saying this. And so I went to the Alianza and mentioned to them, look, if Edwin is interested, would you be willing, because they have sources of income, to fund this? Yes. It really never came to fruition. And I think mainly because no one really wanted to pursue it. And again, I'm not going to pursue this on my own. For one, in terms of, I'm not going to do that. It needs to be of the community. Mm-hmm. 'Cause it's useless for me, It does not make sense, because then I'm just isolated and continuing to isolate myself. Mm-hmm. I even suggested to EQB getting in touch with Edwin. I don't think that ever happened. But in specific to the killing, there were, in a way, I would say, in place parameters or boundaries in place, simply because this had been brought up at the time that Rosselló had said he was going to take legal action. And inasmuch he then pulled out, suspended all of that, but the government of Puerto Rico under Calderón went into litigation. So there were certain parameters in place of this discussion and of that study in terms of EPA and both governments. Now, can it be expanded upon? Absolutely. Should we be doing that? Absolutely. We don't necessarily need the government's permission. Certainly I say yes. Should we get it? Fish and Wildlife have said to me, you want to go out there? They have endorsed Edwin. Go out there. If something were to stop us on that, then we go to court and we find out, what do you mean you're going to stop us, These are the steps that need to be taken. Hopefully, maybe they will come into that conversation with Prats, who I have been in touch with. He, again, was very helpful in continuing this. But again, if there's a lack of dialogue, it's really the community's fault, that lack of dialogue in between.
Do you think that that the lack of dialogue is also an effect of the battles for scientific criteria or political criteria?
Ay, claro que sí, claro.
Como de que, bueno, ya sea la situación del colonialismo, el inglés, el español, como también de que, ¿por qué no científicos puertorriqueños? ¿O por qué no este método en vez del otro?
Again, I think you need to separate, you need to separate, your personality problem, your ego problem. I mean, it's just like raising a child in that sense. You need to be flexible enough to say, as a parent, am I doing the right thing? And if you have a doubt, seek help. I would, if your child's sick, am I going to say, I'm not going to go because it's in the United States or it's in France, where this particular cure that someone, it's been indicated, exists. Now, that's ridiculous. Again, that for me was, I think, something that I felt, a tension that I felt with the Independence Party, in a sense, I personally felt, what Kennedy did, per se, in pursuing a legal suit, that really should have been done years ago.
In vehicles.
Yes. Hasta qué punto that I'm not going to, I'm not going to say, oh, well, I wasn't born in Vieques, so I don't have a right. I mean, I can't even begin to see that is sensible. That's not sensible in terms of, your perception of life, your perception of community, your perception of well-being. The Viequenses have to be sacrificed as guinea pigs to an ideology, their health. I mean, this is what's still going on. I mean, we're being sacrificed as guinea pigs to an argument between the EPA and the Navy that is not going to be resolved. And you'll say, oh, well, you know, I'm going to look at this only ideology, you know, with a political or ideological point of view to stay out of it. Well, then again, you know, we're being used as guinea pigs, and I think that's wrong. It's wrong as in the, you know, that's absurd. You know, the value of human life, is that political? You know? And it's keeping us from asking all of these questions that need to be asked, that do have answers. If it means we need to go out there and seek them on our own, then that's what we need to do. But to sit back and deal in these abstracts, for me, you know, this is a major problem. And you know, how do we approach, you know, how do we resolve that? You know, is something that must be considered. You know, so I think, oh, okay, the next meeting, to walk in and say, we're doing nothing. What are we doing? You know, how do I approach that? I really, at this point, I would like, you know, to sit with somebody and say, okay, how can we really do this and follow it through? Because we have got to start making actual advances in this and not just posturing.
And one of your begs would be pushing for legal action from the part of the Commonwealth government or from the municipality.
All of this, you know, this kind of thing would be, you know, I think legally where it is right now, what it would have to be is a civil suit. What's available under record and circle, what is available, you know, is known. That can easily be found out. I'm not immediately thinking, oh, lawsuit. Immediately I'm thinking, you know, what are we really going to do? This is, you know, we see that this avenue has these limitations. Are we satisfied with these limitations? That really is not up to us. That, for me, is what we need to take to the broader community. You know, I would think, obviously, if we're talking about there's a threat here to our health, which is what we're talking about, then, you know, we don't have to wait for a survey to be taken. You know, look, we do want to find out how contaminated something is. So immediately my suggestion is we need to go in and on our own start sampling and finding out and just go from there. Discuss that with lawyers, in particular, with scientists, obviously.
With the municipality, so you can get some support?
Well, I think that would have to be done with them knowing about it and see what happens. You know, what if any blockade is going to come to that, both in terms of access to the land and in terms of analysis. Are we going to have trouble finding a lab, et cetera, et cetera? How legally are we going to be able to then use this information? First, how are we going to be able to get it properly analyzed if there's going to be a problem? Those mm-hmm. we need to find out. Mm-hmm. From there, obviously you have to get into a discussion with the governments, and they would come, just from the fact of doing this. Once you get the ball rolling, all the rest will follow. All of that, in terms of jurisdiction, all of those questions of jurisdiction. This is a very naive kind of approach, but that's how I see it. Mm-hmm. You have to begin the conversation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, what I've been doing is saying, okay, it will come, just be patient, you're not being patient enough. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I especially when I hear people be outright dishonest about what's going on, that scares me. Then I go, oh, no, this is not good. This is not good. Mm-hmm. We're not going to get, this is not going to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And people say, oh, we sit here in this TRC and we examine all these things and talk about it all the time. We never do that. We don't do any of that. We don't have discussions amongst ourselves or,
And what do you do in that TRC instead?
We only go to the meetings when When there's a meeting, we go to it. Do we meet otherwise really ever and review any of these documents? No. No. And discuss them? No. The very things, that I'm talking about that needs to be done, is that happening? No.
So what happens in those meetings at least?
Maybe has an agenda and presents what it can of the agenda. Typically, in the past few meetings, people have become more engaged, like Jorge is there now, and he feels more comfortable. Fernando Porto, in conversing, and he will bring up situations that may or may not have to do with the agenda. I will as well. We seem to be the two that speak the most. But in terms of continuity, there's no continuity whatsoever, really, within this. I think Jorge commented on the no further action when there were public hearings. Also, Jorge Colon commented. I have never been given the written document to really review. From listening to it, I thought this was, there were both very good commentaries. But in the whole of we have not discussed the whole of that process, really. There were meetings where Jorge presented what he was going to say to some members of the community that only came through invitation of, like the Alianza. It was a very small, it wasn't by any means informing the community. And it was, it wasn't a discourse. It was Jorge telling people what he was going to do, this kind of thing. It was a presentation, I've never been yet in a discourse about, or seen any of that take place. Some discourse is beginning to happen between Juan Cruz Perez and Jorge, but it's all very fragmented, without continuity. Be patient. I say too much is going on. I've really sort of given up on the patience idea to a very large degree. There's just too much happening. And again, the real problem of, okay, let's identify what's out there, which just shouldn't be that difficult. And if it is going to be that difficult, let's find out what those difficulties are. That to me is the most important thing now.
And it's not happening.
And it's not happening. We're not going to get that from this. We're going to get more of the same. And is it worth doing this and arguing and pressuring for more? Because yes, in terms of the, within government, format here. But the one thing, without participating and really asking these questions, if that never happens, without saying, look, we don't trust this to be sufficient, to be enough information. We really, if you don't say it, you're not going to get an answer,
But I was also gonna ask you about, well, if you say it like in the press, like going in the.
I think I was very glad for the opportunity to talk to some press. Someone Star more than anybody took hold of it. Great meetings with John Marino. He was very, very devoted, really incredibly devoted to trying to get his hands around all of this and really followed through. I really have great admiration for him. John McFall, John Russ now to a degree.
But in a way, the forum for raising those questions is not necessarily the press, but a mechanism like facing the people that the U.S. Navy is paying for doing this and telling them, I'm looking at what you're doing or looking at the decisions you're making, and this is going to affect us, and we're very concerned. That type of thing is what you see. It's not going on from the scientific within the group or within the scientific community interested in the solidarity with Vieques and things like that.
Yeah, okay. And that's where it, to a degree, yes, it is. I keep saying it only helps to understand a little bit more about this process. You know, because yes, we're within this process. Where can we take advantage of this process that we're not, is one question. There may well be avenues there that we can. And we haven't done it. Is there no avenue in this process that's advantageous to us? We need to make that, we need to understand that. We need to be able to define that. My tendency is to believe there isn't, except under the Safe Drinking Water Act, we're going around in circles here. However, that dialogue has not even been had, so I'm not going to be totally defiant about that.
Could you tell me more of the questions that are still, that should be considered in order to enter this process or to leave the room in a RAP or TRC or whatever? What questions do you think should be asked?
Well, if you were to say, just to say, look, EPA, look, we know, in the late 90s, for one, to condense it, for one, in the late 90s, for the first time, what happened in Massachusetts happened. You not only asked the military to stop training, which that was a first. No one ever told the military what to do, certainly not the EPA. But you also ordered those studies. And this was through dialogue, and I'll show you the letters. I have the letters of the people, who helped develop this dialogue with the EPA and the military and the senators and the governor there and all. But that these studies were done under the Safe Drinking Water Act in an administrative, which is then an enforcement order, was administered by the EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Whereas here at Vieques, in parallel time, we get it under RCRA, not, an order by consent, which the Navy doesn't even recognize for the most part to a large degree. But anyway, to get back to it, so what was discovered under these studies essentially collapsed all of this that is put forth in these studies under RCRA and CERCLA. Because lo and behold, all of this estimates, and maybe there, it isn't there, were definitely found in the groundwater and the surface soil, etc. There's no difference between groundwater and surface, or nothing that great, and in the air there, than here in Puerto Rico. At the same time, you have half of the United States Attorney Generals writing to the Office of Management and Budget about the severe limitations of this military approach, installation restoration program, and how it's a numbers game, and how in fact there are very serious problems then that arise, health and environmental problems. Pleading that EPA and the state representatives, EQBs, the state boards, should be more involved and have say in what's going on. And there's going to be incredible litigation. These are the states that are having to put up with the health effects, et cetera, et cetera. You have incredible amount of evidence of the failures of investigations. Not only that, you have them within these investigations specific to Vieques themselves, where the Navy is making a mockery, right there in black and white, of EPA, of public health, of this entire process. So just on that, you don't even have to go into the science. Just in that, and you're saying, look, it doesn't work. Why is it, what are we going to get out of this realistically? When our concern is health. So very rightly, the administration of Calderon has turned around, and the Department of Health has been pursuing these studies. Now, again, there's a lack of communication and discourse in the community about this, which that's an absurdity. They should be hand in hand with these other groups, this TRC and all of this. And also within the people who are on these groups, on these committees, they argue, they don't seem to meet, except like the TRC, except when, Department of Health comes around. It's the lack of continuity, the lack of discourse, all of this. If we didn't have that, we could say to EPA, look, we've got these problems of health. How severe are they really? How much is perception? how much is reality here. You know, it seems very apparent to me Department of Health was open to that dialogue. I have not seen it been furthered to our advantage. Mm-hmm. You know, those kinds of dialogues is then you use with the EPA, with the EQB, all of this together with Fish and Wildlife. Fish and Wildlife, you want to talk about commentaries and where they're seeing all the faults in these investigations, they're stronger than EPA. You know, again, the question is what's your objective here? And then follow through on it, you know, not just sort of making press statements or, you know, like.
But with the dialogue in terms of Fish and Wildlife, some of the strategy of some of the movements, it's not put on what Fish and Wildlife could offer and their studies and all that to help the situation of Vegas, but the fact that they have a law enforcement bothering the community.
Well, there are all of these, yes, all of these are, legitimate concerns that need to be resolved. But that, I think you're hitting on the point. You know, do people want to resolve this or just, and that's the difference. I think to a large degree people just want to complain, keep up a perception of a problem that maybe isn't as great as the larger problem, which could be if you have a really ignorant political party in power or a very corrupt, morally corrupt, terrible things could happen here. And we need to be smart enough and at the we need to be taking care of this place, not just taking care of our slogans of our political groups or, and you have to be at the, you have to be, keeping an eye on things, and you have to be engaged. And that's where, that's where I don't get it. In that sense, then I say, well, then they're anarchistic. They don't believe in governments. Well, okay,
And Stacey, now that we have been traveling through the whole, it's a very complex political picture, and also environmental and all that. There are a lot of strategies going on, conversations and holdings and all that. When one sees the big picture, what we were discussing about the Puerto Rican trench,
if you
what are the dangers of not having some of the conversations? One, we have a bigger picture that relates to Washington, relates to the way in which the U.S. might be using Puerto Rico in the future, and things like that.
Well, again,
what were you were?
Like specifically, I'm not. The Puerto Rican Trench is the second deepest submerged trench, oceanic trench in the world, and as I said, the other is in the Mariana Islands. Now, how is it? You just say, well, what is it that how has the federal government viewed that? Well, the Department of Defense calls that their Department of Defense dumping grounds, as the Puerto Rican government is very well aware. It was probably you were too young. Just a few years ago, not that long ago, there were very heated discussions about depositing nuclear waste there. Policies being what they are in the United States concerning environment. The United States has a very poor record in terms of the environment. Puerto Rico, it's hard to say what their record is because they don't have the ability to enforce in many instances, because you're talking about federal jurisdiction, and in other instances specific to what my concern is with hazardous waste. In Puerto Rico, you don't have a hazardous waste landfill. You don't have that kind of permitted. I think Puerto Rico is sort of working that way, unfortunately, I think, towards that. landfill. However, those landfills do exist, such as Vieques is a dump, is a hazardous toxic waste dump. You do have the Puerto Rican Trench, which is being used, has been used by the military, has also been used in terms of oil spills.
And these uses have been documented or not?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. In terms of the Puerto Rican Trench, in terms of oil, in terms of certain arguments that's been in the paper about nuclear dumping. Now, what nuclear dumping has the military done? I don't know. I certainly would imagine that has happened. That has happened, and that it will continue to happen. And this is the kind of thing where I do become very concerned. This is a dump. It's not going to change.
When you say this is a dump, you're referring to Vieques?
To Vieques, this eastern part of Vieques. That has, that's what it is. While we're looking at the kind of so-called cleanup that the military is talking about, which is essentially just, they have a very, very cynical and mocking way that they're referring to all of this now. What they're talking about is continuing operation of it. While they're continuing operation of it in this way that they're talking about their so-called cleanup, what is to stop anyone else within the military to use it? Under especially the Bush regime, this is a major concern for me. This whole idea of a bridge between here and Ceiba, Neguabo, that's, the Homeland Security maintaining lands in the eastern part of Puerto Rico, in Roosevelt Roads. Though many people say, oh, maybe you're getting a little far-fetched here. I don't think it's so far-fetched. I think you'd be really naive not to be aware of this and to keep an eye on toxic waste. It's very expensive to get rid of toxic waste in the United States, where states are demanding that you do it according to laws. If you stay in this fight here, if you stay without defining what can and cannot be done here, and that battle, I think, will take a very long time. We need to keep an eye on that. I think the Calderon administration is doing what they can to meet those challenges. We don't know what will happen, when they're gone. And what questions are not being asked. Again, it's just representative of where we need to be at that table, and not limited by political ideology. We need to know what our legal rights are, we need to be in conversations with the Puerto Rican government as well as the federal government.
In regards to the bridge, do you think that might be what would be like?
Well, I just look at what has happened in the United States. In the United States right now, they're talking about moving toxic, nuclear waste by road, which, is a horrifying. But this is already happening, and states having to put up with it. Now I'm forgetting, taking it from Utah and taking it where? I'm trying to remember the state where they're. Again, a Yucca Mountain I can't remember, where they want to deposit it. And this particular state is fighting it under the Bush administration, under the Cheney energy program. It remains to be seen that, the environmental side will have any say for quite a while to come, because we'll have to undo all of this problem that Cheney and Bush are putting in place in terms of energy waste. Again, what has Vieques been used for? It's been used for this. So it's not, it's ridiculous to ignore that. That's what it's been used for. And in effect, in the way the Navy right now cynically is approaching this so-called cleanup investigation, it's still under operation. And that is a major concern. Again, and if Roosevelt Roads never officially closed. It's just a matter of distributing the different lands that will go to different uses. Homeland security is to be one of them. When you keep, and like in any industrial waste question, when you keep an area in production, in productivity, in operation, well, you're not going to be doing some of the studies, that need to be done in terms of closure, because it's in production, it's in operation.
And you think that is happening in Vieques?
Well, I know that's happening in Vieques.
Not in regards necessarily to keeping the.
Well, I mean, in terms
of destruction, like there's no
that it could
bombing,
be
but
imported in. I don't, there again, we that was done. That was done. That has not been concluded well enough for me. There's certain things that have come up in these documents that give me an idea. We really need to pursue this better, to understand, what rights we have, what rights Puerto Rico has, in terms of the jurisdiction. As far as I know, Puerto Rico does not have, a good, strong foothold in terms of jurisdiction over that. And this needs to be understood. How limited is it or not?
Going back to the question of the bridge, so you're suggesting that since Vieques has been used as a toxic dump, the bridge might be opening an avenue for a future use of the eastern lands. Is that what you?
Yeah.
That would, could, but
already, I mean, this was done,
pero
for years.
Me gustaría que, no es que yo quiera impulsarte que tú digas eso,
no.
pero que me dejes esa.
How did that chronologically happen?
No, pero ¿qué tú piensas del puente? ¿Qué tú piensas del puente? Así como que.
Well, first of all, certainly that's a horrifying idea in terms of just the amount of people that would then have access, to Vieques. That's a terrifying thought. In the cars, et cetera, but specific, that this conversation came out of, this idea of the bridge and all this whole, with the $40 million, and this conversations with Roosevelt Roads, and oh yes, a bridge is a great idea with, certain politicos having this discourse, and we'll do what we can to help with the funds for the highway, that you would need, and it's a red flag is going off. Oh, this is a great idea, so just keep continuing using Vieques, the military, as they have been using it, which is transporting from Roosevelt Roads, transporting from, by land and sea, by land from, the parte oeste, by land, and from sea from Roosevelt Roads, and if you do now have, this under Bush, where at the same time this was happening, this whole thing of Yucca Mountain and nuclear waste, and deciding, they picked this state where they want to impose it on that state, and the state is struggling now with what jurisdiction it has, if any, to stop this from happening.
Stop the land transport, the ground transportation.
Yes, and having to accept it. And I'm looking at this and thinking, we better be very careful here. We better keep an eye on this. We better. Especially again there too. Look at the trench. I think it's very wise. Everybody should look at a Department of Commerce map of Vieques and Puerto Rico, and the perception there. And you notice throughout it all the dumping areas in the water. This, just an account. A woman wrote an account on the Berman, the oil spill, in Puerto Rico. Majority of that, all of the refuse from that was dumped in the Puerto Rican trench. And this is how then I learned of the way the Defense Department refers to it as the defense dumping grounds. So what unrecorded dumping is there? When you get into the idea of regionally, what has this area been used for? Well, does it make more sense to keep using that area for that, for that purpose? These questions are not being asked or answered,
For example, one question.
And it's not that far-fetched. I mean, people would not think, you're not going to use depleted uranium without letting people know. They do it all the time. They do it every day, with their soldiers, their own soldiers. You know, training grounds in the United States. You know, I've seen they do atrocious things. You know, and you cannot, you know, you have to be, you know, it goes back to that, I guess, that helicopter. You know, they would have killed us. We meant nothing to them. And, you know, that perception of meaning nothing. You know, yes, you need, you know, God, absolutely, you need to talk about that and discuss this. But on the other side of it, too, you know, in this discussion, should not be excluded as a result. You know, I don't think we're, you know, I think we're foolish to victimize ourselves. I think that's what we're doing by doing that. Mm-hmm. You know, we're really, you know.
By
not engaging in conversation.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm.
By not, you know, by not being at that table. And not only not being at the table, but understanding, okay, you know, each person has a different perception in this, you know, but our reason for being there is not just to talk politics. Our reason for being there is to see to what degree is this valid, this information, and what's missing. What's good about it, what's, you know, what's not good about it. What more do we need to do within the legislation of Puerto Rico, within the laws of Puerto Rico, within the laws that are existing in the United States?
And then would you see that movement of discussing the complexities of the laws, the insufficiencies, as political as it is discussing the protocols, that how because I think both are political. Yeah. In its own way, not only the protocol, but the specifics.
Yeah, exactly.
Once you have accepted that even in a protocol that might be insufficient because it's colonial, speaking about language, for example, or science, even when that those codes might be already biased and all that, discussing whatever those codes want to support in their own terms, it's political as well. That's the conception of the political you have.
But there again, you know, what I think it's important to understand, this is not just happening in Vieques. This is happening amongst states in the United States. This is happening amongst nations in the world. Again, you know, and to me, that represents a tool to use, unify with these people. Your voice gets stronger, your voice gets heard. You know, use it as a tool. Don't, you know, that's what you know, there again, you know, don't say, oh, you know, yes, we're being colonized. You know, and there are horrible things going on throughout the world as a result of this attitude. And, you know, to make comparisons, I don't even like to think of that, but if you're going to say, you know, 10,000 people dying in a day, yes, that has happened in places. Chemical factories, you know, for money, for the United States, yes. You know, within 2 weeks, 10,000 people dead. Government's lying about it, that happens. Do you put your head in the sand and say, oh, I don't want, you know, I don't think so. You know, if we truly, I think, you know, one thing I think is that the United States has a lot to learn from Puerto Rico.
The United States
really has a lot to learn.
Really have?
Has a lot to learn from no Puerto this part. You know? Mm-hmm. And this again is something, a perception I personally feel with the Calderon administration in particular. I felt there was a recognition of that. The sense of fight, the sense of her standing up and standing, you know, not willing to negotiate, not willing to, not that it wasn't not willing to negotiate, but in a way, she was very firm in her protection, her stance on the protection and being protective of the Viequenses and of the people of Puerto Rico. And I think, you know, again, I think there's a great deal that can be learned from the Puerto Rican culture. You know, the United States has a great deal to learn about it that can be very beneficial to our cause that will come out in these dialogues, if we would just engage in them. And again, as I was saying, with Puerto Ricanos now more and more in the United States, that this, we're not alone in a sense that, that maybe we were there. And there's more to be learned and exchanged. And to help us, it just has to begin, and that's...
¿Y cómo empezarías quizás, ya bajándonos un poco de toda la masa de documentos y demás, qué cosas se han hecho con la juventud, con la niña aquí en Vieques, en términos de ambiente, cómo los niños responden? Yo entrevisté unos nenes y me hablaban del reciclaje.
I talk with, mainly in a very, because, like Julian, todos los amigos de mi hijo, de gente que viene a la casa, they see all these papers, so through the years, we talk about it. In este sentido that, what can be done on a day-to-day basis. The idea of recycling, the idea of picking up trash, the idea of not using, with my son's friend, not using Clorox to get fish, this kind of thing, talking about waste waters from their house, sewerage, this kind of, and the contamination of the military,
And do you think the in terms of environmental education and political, how do you see the political education on the one side and the environmental education?
Yeah.
Do you think they're going hand in hand, or?
Well, I think within the schools, I'm not that familiar. The environmental quality board, as they have approached the schools. My own approach with the schools has really just been, as a friend of, particular teachers, talking, just in general, not specifics of contamination, just in general stewardship of the environment. But the EQB has put out, I think, they weren't being political. I mean, in presenting this coloring book, I don't know, are you familiar with any materials? There, what I asked was that we have more follow-up with the Alianza de Mujeres, for instance. To keep this on a constant basis. This has not been done. Again, where do I see it? Because they have, I guess, a political problem with the EQB. I don't,
EQB is the company that works...
No, EQB, la Junta Calidad Ambiental.
Ah.
Tú sabes, they were there and they've done it and they could have come back, but the community didn't engage enough. And that, okay, so that happened. Fish and Wildlife has been going in. They're really great kids. I've talked with the kids that are working on the program on Fish and Wildlife, putting it together. I haven't seen all of their material, but in my conversations with them, they're really, they've got great ideas, and I think it'll be very beneficial.
Do you think antagonizing with Fish and Wildlife would not lead politically? Do you think sometimes this attitude of antagonizing with Fish and Wildlife would be beneficial in the long run for cleanup, for rescuing the lands, or?
I know that there are people that say that. I mean,
strategy,
to me, I say, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you've got very small-minded people in the Congress, and in the, anywhere of any country in politics, and mean-spirited people. But more than that, I truly believe in the people here. I truly believe in the value, the strength of
the people in Puerto Rico.
Of the people in Puerto Rico. And of the youth, that that this dream can be pursued and achieved. And is it going to be a miserable, is it going to be really difficult? Yes, it's not, none of it's going to be easy. But that it can be done, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing that tells me I'm crazy to believe that. You know, the military's out of here. That happened. You know?
Do you think you were gonna leave to see that?
Well, I guess, you know, I'm one of these people, you know, that actually, I'm not so sure that it wasn't sort of coming. The more and more I look at these documents, that it wasn't sort of like, yeah. You know, prior to that, to opening all these things up, you know, the thought of their leaving. I thought we had a good chance for getting the lands on the west side, but there what scared me was, what would they be used for? You know, under Rosselló and Carlos Romero Barceló was pretty terrifying thoughts of what was going to happen over there. But I must say, even, you know, with all this help of the central government, because the local groups are so political, you know, I think we still have the same problem because we're not dialoguing with the municipality and all of that. I think small efforts are being made, but I don't see them coming to fruition. I mean, maybe you have knowledge of meetings that I don't. You know, I'm pretty much aware of all the different meetings going on, and so far I don't know of any where it's really meshing, where people are really working together. And so, you know, again, which is part of what this whole conversation is about. And in that, I think, yeah, it's a generational thing. And more conversation does need to be had with the youth of Vieques to learn, you know, how to take control of their land.
And between the organizations?
Yes, if that can be done. If that can be done. You know, I get a little pessimistic now. It's so many years. But this kind of thing, you know, my son is always, you know, just calm down, just wait, you know, kind of thing. On the other hand, he also says, no, nobody gives a damn about any of this, which I think is true to a large degree. Everybody's just sort of worried about day-to-day life.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias, Stacey. Ha sido larguísima la entrevista, pero muy buena. Y espero que nada, que podamos estábamos hablando de la combatividad, eso es bien interesante. Que a veces yo digo que esta etapa quizás no es tan combativa y requiere un esfuerzo distinto.
Well, that's where, again, I think, too, you know, that the use of Vieques, my faith is there. My fear is do we have enough time? You know, that is my fear, that is my greatest fear. But I think, I don't know how much of an opportunity you've had to meet the youth here, but they're tremendous people. They're you know, they really are tremendous people. If we can just get the education that we need, then you know, and I think they will, you know.
Pero la cuestión de la combatividad y leer los documentos no es montarse en una lancha y ser arrestado y hacer desobediencia civil. Es otro tipo de combatividad, ¿no?
Yeah. Well, I think you have faith in you're angry. You know, you want to speak out against the absurdity of this lack of respect. You know, and there's nothing that's going to stop you. You know, I mean, you're not sitting there thinking, oh, you know, I went through like these periods of my phone being fooled with, and constantly we couldn't hook up computers to it, and very, very frustrating. You know, you're not going to. I mean, that's not going to jail, but you know, when you believe in something, there's a great deal of courage that comes from that.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias.
Well, I keep, you know, with that. Have you seen any of these? These are the studies first. They come out. These.
Okay, déjame.
Okay. These are the actual. Can you see them there? I've got them sort of. The investigations of the military has been doing those mostly. I know you have a draft and then a final stage to these. So there's typically 2 per investigation. then these are just correspondence. One of the ways I can best understand, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a scientist, and just get a handle, both on, on what EQB, EQB, EPA, what their authority is, what they actually can achieve, what they feel they're not achieving. Then what I do is look at the correspondence between the military and the EPA about these investigations. So that's also what a lot of this is. And that's the kind of thing then that should be shared with the science community and the legal community, so that they understand, well, certainly the legal, they understand the process. This is more for the scientists who have not been involved in, say, a RCRA, CERCLA kind of cleanup. To what degree does that process affect the science?
So when is your novel coming out?
Yeah, well, that's what, sometimes I think maybe that's what I should do. Is that what you think I should do?
It's a lot of material you have for...
It's a lot of repetition, a lot of this. You'd be amazed how much is, this is very repetitious. And, and then some of it EPA sends me, I think, to give me hope. To like keep talking, kind of thing, like this. Sounds good, right? Prove science-based environmental stakeholder, that's us, processes. What do you think, as just through this experience, what do you think of in being engaged in this? What is your perception?
Of you being engaged in all this?
Of anybody being engaged in it?
Of anybody being engaged in it?
From your experience.
That while keeping a sensibility towards the colonial problem, the protocol, and all that.
Oh well, you have no problem, but of seeing that throughout these documents.
Yeah.
It's it's there in black and white.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think there is no other avenue right now. I think you have to keep the battle in all fronts, and this is one.